Hello, and welcome to Changing the Narrative, a virtual conversation series about race, equity, and beyond. I am Professor Quresh Ali Lansana, the Director of the Center of Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation at OSU-Tulsa. I'm also the host of the Changing the Narrative series, which has grown this year into a collaborative project of 5 academic centers. We're off this month for the holidays, but we wanted to share some of our favorite moments, insights, and stories from the past year of broadcasts, including last December's Honoring All Holidays session. Changing the Narrative returns live on Zoom and Facebook on January 18th for the National Day of Racial Healing, where we will discuss the significance of the day. As a reminder, the views and opinions expressed in the Changing the Narrative series are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Oklahoma State University-Tulsa or its academic centers. Any content provided by our panelists and moderators are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. I hope you enjoy the video and happy holidays.
Yeah, so in E5 we do not celebrate Christmas. It just does not exist at all. But I did grow up in a household where we believe that the fat white man Santa was coming bringing us gifts, right? And so that's how I grew up. But as I had children, we did that for a little bit, but then when I really learned what Kwanzaa was about, Kwanzaa, it means more to me. And even though I have a tree, my kids have Christmas, but we do practice Kwanzaa, and it is one of the most beautiful things ever. It's not a religion. It's just something that Milana Karenga, is it Karenga? I always mess this up. Karenga.
Milana Ron Karenga.
Yeah, put together in the 60s, in the late 60s. And it is the most beautiful thing. And I wish that Black people could really do this faithfully every year, each day. I mean, it starts December 26th, ends on New Year's, January 1st. And it's Umoja, which means unity, Kujichagulia, which means self-determination. Ujamaa, collective work and responsibility, Nia, which is my favorite, purpose, Kumba, creativity, and Imani, faith. And what I love about those is that each day you practice that with your family, or you do some type of event or activity that makes your children think about unity, learning about self-determination and collective work and responsibility. And it gets hard because you have to be really creative to come up with ways to really instill that in your children. So just imagine if those principles were more important than presents, and what you put into your children. Think of the human beings that you are bringing into this world, and that you're leaving here to build, and how better they would be. I get inspired every year at Kwanzaa. Rudisa Library, Alicia Lattimore puts on a beautiful Kwanzaa celebration. I've never missed one, and it's going to be virtual this year. It's going to be different. But Chief Ugunwale Amishan, he hosts the Kwanzaa celebration, and it is beautiful when community comes together and practice this. But I really wish that it was something that our culture would really accept as the main holiday for the year, and really just put life into it, because it is powerful. It is very powerful.
Hanukkah is about holding on to one of the pieces about Hanukkah is about holding on to your status as a minority in a majority culture, right? So how do you hold on to those pieces that make you who you are? And don't lose that in sight of people who are trying to tell you not to do that. So Hanukkah is about, standing on your own 2 feet and really kind of saying, no, this is who I am, and that's okay. And so I think one of those things for me that is, while it is a minor holiday, one of those things that's really important about it this time of year is that perspective that this is about autonomy in some ways, and that this is about how do we interact when everything around us is telling us no, or telling us don't do that? And how do we still stand in self-reliance and self-resilience to be able to say, this is who I am, and nothing is going to change that for me or about me, that I get to be my own person. And it's really important in some ways to think about that as we, there was a debate about whether you start with the Hanukkah completely filled up and diminish the light over the time, or you start with one candle and you increase the light over the time. This is one of the major debates in the Talmud about Hanukkah, from two of our sage rabbis, Hillel and Shammai. And the result ended up being that we start with a little and we increase it over time, because we need to increase that light. We need to bring it into the world. There's a reason Hanukkah happens at the darkest time of the year. Our responsibility is to bring that light and awareness and that assistance to other people who can't do that. That's why you publicize it. That's why when you light the Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah, one of the pieces about Hanukkah is you're supposed to put it in the window so that other people can see it, so that they're reminded too, or that they start to ask questions about it as well.
That when I think about Black Lives Matter, I'm not thinking about Black lives. No. I'm thinking about, my friend, Christy Williams. I'm thinking about my friend, Quraysh. I'm thinking about my cousin, Sammy, who, I'm part Moroccan, right? And Moroccans are on the spectrum, right? You have you have white as white like me. I'm blending in with my shirt a little bit. And then you have my cousin who is the darkest of the dark, right? That's how Moroccans are, Northern Africans, So when I think of Black Lives Matter, I'm thinking about my own blood, When I'm thinking about, Jewish rights, I'm thinking about my friends, my colleagues. When I'm thinking about Christian rights, I'm thinking about my friends, my colleagues. When I'm thinking about, white America, a lot of times we like to say that white privilege and this, that, and other, but there is, we live in Oklahoma, right? So we see the other side of white America too, right? We don't just see the California side, we see the Oklahoma side of white America. That I think about those people too. That when I'm driving to Turner Falls and I'm seeing broken roads and I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, I'm thinking like, where's my government at? Why aren't they helping these people? And so that's what justice looks like to us. And when it comes to economic justice, as I mentioned, our religion has very strict rules that don't do this and don't do this and don't do this, And so when you ask and you gave the prompt for us, what does our religion do to change? I mean, our religion says get rid of it. You got to get rid of the virus. If the virus is still there, it's never going to get better. That's just the reality. And so what I do for my own community is, I preach and I encourage for us to pick up the slack, That way we can stand before God on the day of judgment and we can say, God, I did my best. I didn't live in a perfect society, but I did my best to make it better.
And we are now in a moment where there's legislation being passed in just about every state in this country, including the one in which we reside, that is rolling back, right? There was already voter suppression. Now we have bills that are essentially Jim Crow era legislation to stop people of color and Black folks specifically from voting. How far removed are we from the time in which Miss Shirley was making her run? What has changed?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I get a lot of criticisms for saying those things because there are those in Tulsa that believe, oh, well, we're making a lot of progress. We're making a lot of headway. But then when we really think about it, when we really look at the numbers, the statistics, the studies, the disparities, are we really changing anything, or are we just coming together wanting to sing Kumbaya for these instances of symbolism, right? We want to look like we're doing something without actually changing anything, without actually moving the needle and changing people's lives. And so again, that's just one of those things. I've been labeled as divisive, as I'm sure some of my other ladies that's on this call has been labeled as divisive, because we tend to want to speak truth to power and say, no, that's not going to work. I'm not going to show up just to put a smiley face or paint the barn or lipstick on a pig when we have issues that we are faced with in this community that are detrimental to lives, to community. And so you know, it's one of those things. What has changed? We have to continue to ask that question. What has changed? And unfortunately, in my view, not much from 75 years ago or even from 100 years ago.
And go ahead, Mrs. Alicia, go ahead.
Put a different slant on it. We are where we were 75 years ago, but I think it's because there was a change. They're looking around and seeing what happened in Michigan and what happened in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania and what happened in Georgia, and they're terrified. They saw that African Americans showed up in record numbers and voted. They showed up early and they waited, even though all kinds of suppressive tactics were employed. And a lot of the bills that are happening all over the nation, and even in Oklahoma, where they got their way, so leave us alone, but even in Oklahoma, it's because they are afraid. They see that there is a possibility. They see that African Americans all over the country are seeing the light and valuing their vote, and they're really concerned. Oh my gosh, what if Oklahoma African Americans hear this? They might want to vote and have their vote count. So I would say that I respect Councilor Hall Harper immensely, and I don't mean to be a contrarian, but we are exactly where we were 75 years ago, but I think it's as a result of change and a result of fear of change.
Dr. Crutcher?
I don't really have anything to add. I'll just fall right into the middle of these ladies and just simply say nothing has changed. And the fact that I was at the March on Washington this past summer, fighting for the exact same thing that Martin Luther King and John Lewis was fighting for over a half of a century ago, tells you, I mean, we were fighting and marching to reinstate the John Lewis Voting Act. And so that should say a lot within itself.
Back, just being able to see people who look like me, who have stories like I have, and even being able to see my community represented on television or in movies, that is just the craziest thing to me. And then it's not only just in film, but at the Met Gala, we have Native American fashion designers. It's kind of everywhere when you look around right now. And I think that's something that I am still trying to wrap my head around, because I've never watched a movie or a television show and thought, oh, that is so relatable until now, until we have productions like Reservation Dogs. And then the fact that it's happening in Oklahoma with local crew, with local writers and actors, I think that's doing amazing things for the industry here that we have growing, like Zach said, rapidly every day. And then I think the other really neat thing for me to see is everyone that I've talked to who has either been on Reservation Dogs for like a small part or working behind the scenes, they all talk about how cool it is to just have a community of people working on this. It's, you know, all Native production team, and it just feels like a community that is for them and by them. And so those stories are really cool to hear too.
Yes, I feel like it's really strange if you stop and think about it. This long history of movies about Oklahoma or made in Oklahoma very rarely include many indigenous characters or writers. And so this moment where people have an indigenous centered Oklahoma based filmed, written, shot, told type of film, or series is really groundbreaking. It's long overdue, and it's really exciting to me as someone who teaches and lives and works here and is from here. So definitely echo what you said there. Also, I think it's interesting how, in all my years of teaching, we always have to talk about in Native American studies ways that Native Americans have been misrepresented in film and TV. And while that's an important thing to recognize and understand, it's also so important to center Indigenous filmmakers and writers as well. So folks like Shelley Nero or Alanis Obamsu and people who've had a really important role for a long time in Indigenous film history. But folks may not necessarily know those names or know who they are. But now with streaming technology, the way we access film and TV differently than we did in the past, that more people know who these folks are and can watch these works. So the accessibility really changes things too. So
I feel like certain genres are always going to be popular, no matter what year it is, things like horror and stuff like that. There's always a market for that. But I think more than anything now, I sort of feel like it's, it always feels like getting a serious drama across the finish line is always one of the most challenging things, especially for an independent filmmaker, because action movies, sci-fi, horror, genre stuff, hard genre stuff usually always has an audience, and it can get funding, it can get sold. But I think drama can be very, very difficult, especially drama that has dark comedy elements in it, or even just a blend of drama and comedy can be really, really difficult. And I think, some of the stuff that we've been seeing come out lately, I think is really, really encouraging, because it straddles the line. It's in a lot of different genres at the same time, like, Res Dogs Again, it's very, very funny, but it also has a lot of very serious stuff going on there. And I think that's one of the things I'm the most excited about genre, as far as kind of what's getting worked on here. Because in my opinion, I feel like that's what life is. It's drama and it's comedy. It's all of those things combined in one, hopefully very honest thing. Yeah, that's my take. I mean, I feel like now is a really great time for us to be trying to develop all this educational programming at OSU, because in my mind, hopefully this is kind of a encouragement to folks to look at their own lives and realize that no matter what their background is, like their life is worthy of representation, and it's worth making content about it and telling stories about. And I feel like hopefully with all the work that you and I are doing, Lindsay, as far as getting folks into some of these workshops, and hopefully eventually, full on, 4-credit classes, that we're giving folks the tools to look within and look at their community and look at, what's going on here locally, and telling stories about it,
Not young. If you're not, I mean, I think about the phrase "okay boomer," right? Like "okay boomer," which applies to me, right? Which I think is kind of bogus, but it also dismisses a generation of folks who allegedly can't get down like we get down. That's what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think about that with my parents. And I feel like there has to be some grace at the end of the day. And that's where I feel like cancel culture doesn't leave any room for that. Because there are certain things, there are certain things that as we learn to unpack, and Crystal made a great point about how the younger generation has really strayed away from these social constructs. And I feel like, where we are, Crystal and Rosemary, we're kind of like right in the middle of that, like between this like way of thinking when it comes to like pronouns and like race and gender, and kind of being in the, like, if they want to be considered they, them, then it's no money out of my account to refer to someone as they, them. And so I feel like, and with my parents, on the other hand, like they haven't had the same type of, like they haven't read the same things. They don't have the same understandings when it comes to like, well, if we want to get down to like a social construct and the Y chromosome and the X chromosome and what the Y chromosome represents, like that's just a whole field of knowledge that my 60 and 70-year-old parents are just like, their mama named him Corey, I'm gonna call him Corey, kind of thing. And so I feel like cancel culture has to have some type of grace for people who have lived 60 plus years within this realm of, like constructions. And now we're all of a sudden asking them to abandon like their 60 years of lived experiences. So there has to be some type of, like middle ground where we understand, and it's not necessarily where we're accepting like disrespect. So I won't allow, my parents to refer to a trans man as she or something like that. So it's like we're not allowing disrespect, but we also are giving some grace. Like you've lived 60 or 70 years with these like ideals, and you've only got about 20 or 30 left. Like, no, but that sounds really bad.
That sounds awful.
Oh, wow.
Rosemary, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm on the one hand, I absolutely agree that we should have grace, and that people who have lived longer are going to feel the brunt of some of this a lot more, this kind of social reckoning or the changing social norms, what's acceptable to say and what's not. On the other hand, if that's not what happens, then things don't ever change. So if the older generation can't change and evolve and learn, and kind of get on board with how we do things now, then how do we move the conversation forward? How do we get to a place of more justice and more freedom for everyone? And that includes the people who might be on board and not be on board. Everybody, is part of that. So when it comes to cancel culture, I think cancel culture is mostly focusing on people who have a platform of some kind. So it's not necessarily like my grandma who, wouldn't be on social media necessarily, or is just friends with, family and friends. But people who have an influence usually celebrities, often politicians, people with a platform who can make a difference, who could be helping to, move the conversation forward, and instead are actually actively engaging in like halting the conversation or doing more damage and insisting on that damage.
Can I speak to that, Q?
Please.
You all, like, I'm a child. I was born in 1978. So my daughter, I had to correct her and tell her I'm not a boomer. She disparages Generation X all the time. I'm like, listen, we're in the between time, just what Autumn said. My daughter thinks that Gen Z is just the greatest, and but people in the boomer generation, they did not have access to all this information. A tweet wasn't sent that could, go around the world. And so grace is 100% should be freely given, especially when people are really, especially when they're trying. Like but to your point as well, Rosemary, if people don't want to change or don't want to get on board, it's just like, you have to be intentional. I have to be intentional as a 43-year-old woman to like care about what kids my age or my kids' age are doing and what they're talking about, because I want my kids to always be able to talk to me about anything. And they do. I don't care about half of the stuff that they talk about, but I want to be informed. So just like we ask our allies, in the BIPOC community to be intentional, I feel like we also should be intentional about, trying to keep up with the changing social norms.
And I don't want to, that was well said from all three of you. And I don't want to make I want to avoid, right, you all and any of us making sweeping generalizations about youth culture, because I was on the Stillwater campus yesterday and I was on the OU campus a couple of weeks ago, and there are still populations of young people who are perpetuating the status quo of what maybe their parents have taught them regarding racism and sexism and homophobia and this and that. So I want to avoid making some sort of sweeping.
That's true.
Yeah.
All these young people are woke, because that's just not true.
A lot of times as adults, what we do is because we're also with our kids, we're always in teaching mode with our kids as well as our students, right, as educators. A lot of times what we do is that we listen to respond, but we don't listen to understand. And I think providing that space for kids to be able to say, like, not necessarily like, here's how I'm going to respond, but making sure that your child has been able to complete their thought and sitting with that thought and being able to really understand what are they trying to say and what is the meaning of this. reaffirming what they mean. Before you reply to them in any way, reaffirming, like, are you telling me that you're sad? Are you telling me that you feel frustrated? Are you telling me you're feeling angry? So trying to figure out what emotion is your child conveying to you before you respond to them, or before you say, oh, well, it's okay, just deal with it, take a deep breath, like all those things are great for when we're trying to respond and give them direction of how to problem solve. But some of this is not problem solving. Some of this is just providing a space for emotions to exist and to listen and understand those emotions and say, it's okay. It's okay that you're having this emotion. It's okay that you're angry. It's okay that you're lacking motivation. It's okay that you feel sad. I feel sad too. Sharing that, validating and affirming and sharing that emotion with your child or with your teen to be able to say, I get it. I totally get it because I'm going through the same thing too. Instead of using that top-down approach of, let me tell you what to do with it. Let's just sit with it for a little bit. And I know that this is really hard for adults to do because we're so busy and we have made ourselves so busy that we don't give ourselves permission to have that time to spend with kids to have that conversation. But I think it's really is important. And definitely do your own work, because like the comment on Facebook came up related to, people taking out their anger or their own emotions that they can't deal with onto vulnerable populations. That is real. That's a real thing. So we have to make sure that we protect our kids and teens for sure.
And as you were talking, I was thinking about something, one of my child that made me realize how I'm carrying the things that I'm going through or witnessing. Like, we say things as adults, not thinking the kids are in tune with what we're saying, but they are clearly listening and they truly do understand. So, absolutely. If you're going to say things, be able to come back and have a conversation with your child and, tell the truth about it, because, like you said, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling frustrated. It's okay to express yourself as an adult to the kids, because they need to hear it so that they know how to handle it in an appropriate manner as they grow and get older too. So.
Absolutely. And even on an umbrella level, like, anything that causes trauma, there is a lot of research out there that talks about the fact that when we repress our emotions, or when we don't talk about our emotion, when we shun our emotions, or when we don't let those emotions move through and process them, is what kind of then carries through and manifests in a way that can cause trauma in the future, grief in the future, loss in the future. So in order to be proactive and be trauma informed, so that this effect, the after effect of this pandemic, doesn't keep going on for 15, 25 years, what we need to do is be more mindful of how we're talking to our kids and teens, and how we're processing those emotions, and are we providing that space for those emotions to move through and get processed so that they don't manifest in a undesirable way in the future.
And I will add, I don't think it's, in my opinion, we don't have to start off something major, like magical. Like, it's not, some of this stuff is real basic. Like you mentioned, spending time and talking. Like, we don't always have to go to the extreme level. What are we going to do to save ourselves and save the world? Oftentimes we have gotten away as a society of socializing with each other in meaningful, engaging situations. So make time to do that. Play games, have conversations, have fun. Having fun can a lot of times take our minds off of what's going on in the world. Even if it's just a balloon fight, summer's coming up, color crayons, bring back the old school games, jump rope, hula hoop, do something fun. And that way, we're not always inundated or surrounded by what we consider the trauma.
That's all for this year. We'll see you next time, January 18th at noon, live on Facebook and Zoom. Thanks for watching.